Good day. Today we are going to discuss the executive department and the powers of the president. Remember that there are three branches in the Philippine government system. The first one is the executive, the second one is the judicial, and we have also the legislative department. Now, today we are going to discuss the executive department and the powers of the president. Now, the executive power. It is the power to enforce and administer the laws. So, in other words, when we say executive power, um, the executive branch is in charge with the execution and the administration of the country's laws throughout the archipelago. Now, who has this power? The executive power is vested in the President of the Philippines. That's according to 1987 Article 7, Section 1 of the Philippine Constitution. Now, when a person or when a Filipino can run for presidency, so these are the qualifications. The first one, he should be a natural born citizen. It means to say that on the day he was born or she was born, she or he is already Filipino citizen. So the citizenship, the Filipino citizenship should be acquired through birth, not by uh, acquisition through law. So the day he was born, he is already a Filipino citizen. That's what we call as natural born citizen. He should be a registered voter. Okay, so on the day of the election, he can vote. That's what we call as registered voter. And then he can read and write. And then at least 40 years of age on the day of election. So in the day of election, if he is 39 years old, then he could not run for presidency on that period of time. Okay, so he must be at least 40 years of age. Okay, and then the resident of the Philippines for at least 10 years immediately preceding the election. So there must be an establishment that uh, a certain person can run for the position of presidency if he is a resident for at least 10 years. So these are the qualifications for presidency. Now, for the terms of office, the president and vice president shall be elected by the people for 6 years. That's according to Article 7, Section 4, Paragraph 1. So it means to say that the president and vice president shall be assume the office through election. Okay. Now, uh, shall not be eligible for any re-election. That is for the president. So, if the president, if a person elected as president in the Philippines, he cannot run for presidency after his administration. So, at any point in time after his presidency, he can no longer run for president. And then, no person who has succeeded as president for more than 4 years shall be qualified. It means to say that uh, he could never have or he can never run for presidency if he is president for more than 4 years. Now, when is the election? Okay, for the regular election, the election must be held second Monday of May. But there are cases in which there would be a new president, not through election, on May, on every second Monday of May. For example, if the president died or he can no longer uh, assume his duties and responsibilities as president, or he is removed from the office, or he resigned, then there would be a new president. And then, if the vacancy occurs for more than 18 months before the next election, then there should be a new president. Or if there is certain law passed by the Congress that there should be a new president, then although there would be no election for the second Monday of May, but there should be a new president. But before the president and vice president assume the office, they should pledge an oath of office. Okay. Now, what is oath? Oath is an outward pledge made under an immediate sense of responsibility to God. And this would be the word for word oath that the president and the vice president should pledge before taking over the office. So I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully and graciously fulfill my duties as President of the Philippines, preserve and defend its Constitution, execute its laws, do justice to every man, and consecrate myself to the service of the nation. So help me God. Now take note, we have to fulfill faithfully and conscientiously the duties of the President to preserve and defend the Constitution. So it means to say that the President cannot alter the Constitution. He can only defend the Constitution and preserve the Constitution, but he could not change the Constitution because it's not the duty of the President to change the Constitution or to make other laws. It's not his power. He can only execute the laws in fairness. So whether you are male or female or whatever status that you have, the execution of the laws should be true to all. Now, the vice president. The vice president has the same qualifications with the president. And then the vice president can is eligible for the position of member of the cabinet without the confirmation of CA or Commission on Appointment. And then the vice president is allowed to serve for two successive terms. So in other words, if ever that the person was then elected as vice president of the Philippines, he can still run for the next election for vice president. Okay. Unlike president that he can only run once. Okay. But the vice president can have two terms for vice president. Now, presidential succession. So what will happen? Okay, if the presidency is being succeeded. Okay, there are two sets of rules. The first one is occurring before the term, and when will this happen? The first one is death, permanent disability. Okay, now before the term, if there would be a failure to elect the president, okay, and then failure to qualify, what does it mean? If ever that there would be elected president on the time of the election, then there would be a succession of presidential power. And then if there is no person qualified to become president. Okay, upon the submission, then there would be no president. The second is occurring midterm. Okay, same, death, permanent disability, and then removal of the office. Well, when can we have the president be removed? Through impeachment, and then the president resigned. Then there would be a succession of presidential power. Now, for example, we have this one, Estrada versus Desierto and Estrada versus Macapagal Arroyo. We know that Arroyo succeeded Estrada. Now, we have this one. Resignation of Estrada cannot be doubted. So, Estrada uh, resigned from presidency. So, the Congress, by resolution, formally recognized Gloria Macapagal Arroyo as the constitutional successor of Joseph Ejercito Estrada by reason of his resignation as president. So it's not that through people's power that Gloria Macapagal Arroyo assumed the office of presidency, but through the resignation of uh, Joseph Estrada. That's the reason why Arroyo uh, succeeded Joseph Ejercito. Now, what are the provisions and inhibitions? So the things that the president should not do and could not do. First, no increase in salaries during the term. So, if ever that the president seated or assumed the position, his salary should remain the same. So, the salary of the president is 300,000 a year. So, that is the salary of the president. Next, shall not receive emoluments. Emoluments. What is that? Emolument is a gift or uh, wages other than his salary. Okay, so the president could not have or any wages, whether in cash or in kind. He could never have that one. Okay, and then shall not hold any other office. So the president can only hold the office of the president. He cannot become the Secretary of Education, Secretary of Finance. He can never be a congressman or a senator when he is in duty as president. Okay, next, shall not directly or indirectly practice any profession, business, or be financially interested in any other contract with franchises of the government. So it means to say whenever a Filipino person became president or become president, then he should perform his duties as president and no other else. If he is an actor, then he can never have an acting career while he is still in the presidency. Or if he is a doctor, then he can never have the uh, profession. He can never have his profession as doctor while he is in the presidency. Can they avoid conflict of interest in the conduct of their offices? So it means to say that there should be no conflict of interest and may not appoint spouse or relatives by consanguinity within fourth civil degree. So what is consanguinity? So the president could never appoint to any other offices. For example, became a secretary of defense or a secretary of budget or whatever it is. He could never appoint his relatives, consanguinity and affinity. So what is consanguinity? Consanguinity is relationship through blood. So what are the examples of relatives by um, relatives by consanguinity? So relatives by consanguinity are child or a parent, that is the first degree. Second degree would be grandchild, sister, brother, or grandparent. That's the second degree. The third degree would be great grandchild, niece, nephew, aunt, uncle, or great grandparent. And for the fourth degree of consanguinity, it would be great great grandchildren, okay, something like that. So that is consanguinity. Now, affinity is different from consanguinity because it is relationship through civil rights. Okay, what is that? It could be spouse, mother-in-law, father-in-law, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, stepson, stepdaughter, stepmother, or stepfather. That is affinity. It's not by blood. Or it could be uh, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, spouse grandparent, spouse granddaughter, grandchild's spouse, or spouse of grandparent. So that is affinity. Now, the power of the president. So these are the power of the president. He has the executive power, power of appointment. What is that? What does it mean? The power of appointment is that the president can choose his secretaries, okay, his cabinet members. The power of removal. He can also remove the person from the offices, okay, uh, in his cabinet member. Power of control, military powers, pardoning power, borrowing power. So the president can borrow money from other countries or other institutions. Diplomatic power, budgetary power, informing power, residual powers, and other powers. So these are the powers of the president. Now, executive power. President shall have the control of all executive departments, bureaus, and offices. He shall ensure that laws are faithfully executed according to Article 7, Section 17. Until and unless a law is declared unconstitutional, the President has a duty to execute it regardless of his doubts as to its validity. Okay, so the power to execute law, that's with the President. Now, power of appointment. Selection by the authority vested with the power of an individual who is to exercise the functions of the given office. So, kinds of presidential appointments, we have appointment made by the acting president, midnight appointment, regular presidential appointment, and ad interim appointment. So, now these are the kinds of appointment. When we say by appointment made by an acting president, it means to say that the president appointed someone to assume the office. For example, Department of Education, Department of Budget, and any other departments in the executive branch. Now, when we say midnight appointment, it is an appointment made by the president to someone to take over the office uh, before the president leave his office. Okay, just like Sereno, uh, Supreme Judge not Sereno, but I forgot the name. Okay, midnight appointment. He was then appointed as Chief of Justice, although President Arroyo, okay, is going to leave the position. Now, a regular presidential appointment, it is a regular appointment made by the president. And then ad interim appointment, this would be the uh, appointed by the president, but they cannot leave their position after the president has been replaced by other person. Unlike the regular appointments and appointment made by the president, for example, as budget secretary, secretary of education, and any other secretaries in the executive department, these secretaries will leave the office if the president is being replaced by someone else. But in ad interim appointment, this will be the appointment that will not be the same as other secretaries, because whenever the president leave the office, the ad interim appointment will still be in command in the office even if the president leave the office. Okay, what are the examples of ad interim? The superintendent of the Department of Education. That's an example of ad interim. So power of appointments. Appointments requiring the consent of the Commission on Appointments that according to Article 7, Section 16. So head of the executive department, except for the vice president. Okay, ambassadors and other public ministers and consuls, and then officers of the armed forces of the Philippines from the rank of colonel to or naval captain, and then officers whose appointments are vested by him or in him by the Constitution. So the appointments without the need of confirmation, these are vested by the Constitution on the President alone, and then appointments that are not otherwise provided by law, those authorized by law to appoint, and the officers lower in rank whose appointment is vested by law in the President alone. Now, not that members, however, are subject to confirmation on the Commission on Appointments. According to the Commission Appointments website, the following need confirmation in order to assume their posts. So these are the offices: Executive Secretary, Secretary of Agrarian Reform, Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of Budget and Management, Secretary of Education, Secretary of Energy, Secretary of Environmental and Natural Resources, Secretary of Finance, Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Secretary of Health, Secretary of Justice, Secretary of Labor and Employment, Secretary of National Defense, Secretary of Public Works and Highways, Secretary of Science and Technology, Secretary of Social Welfare and Development, Secretary of the Interior and Local Government, Secretary of Trade and Industry, Secretary of Transportation and Communications, Secretary of Tourism, Commission on Higher Education, Director General of the National Economic and Development Authority. So these secretaries are uh, will assume the office after the confirmation of the Commission on Appointments. Now, removal of a power of removal. The general rule is that the power is implied from the power to appoint. Exemption, those appointed by, those appointed by him where the Constitution prescribes certain methods for separation from public service. Okay. Now, control of power. or power of control. Okay, so that means that the power of an officer to alter, modify, nullify, or set aside what the named officer had done in the performance of his duties and to substitute the judgment of the former for that of the latter. So this would be the control. Okay, so it means to say that when we say power of control, the president can control over his secretaries. Okay, and then supervision. Supervision is overseeing or power or authority of an officer to see that subordinate officers perform their duties. If the latter fail or neglect to fulfill them, then the former may take such action or steps as prescribed by law to make them perform their duties. Okay, so the president has the control over uh, his subordinates. Of course, he should supervise the performance of his subordinates. Decreeing of qualified political agency or alter ego principle. The multifarious executive and administrative functions of the chief executive are performed by and through the executive departments. The acts of the secretaries of executive departments in regular course of business or unless disapproved are presumptively the acts of chief executive. So it means to say that whatever the decision made by the secretaries, that means that this is also approved by the president. So, for example, in the Department of Education, when Secretary Briones said, okay, that the uh, senior high school, okay, should continue, then this would be the same as the mm, the decision from the president. Okay, so if Secretary Briones will say that the if Secretary Briones will say that the K to 12 will uh, be halted, then that's by the knowledge of the president. Military powers. So the president automatically become commander in chief. So to call up the armed forces to prevent or suppress lawless violence, invasion, or rebellion. And then vested directly by the Constitution, authority to declare a state of rebellion, and then military tribunals are simply instrumentalities of the executive power provided by the legislator of the chief to aid him in enforcing discipline in the armed forces. Okay, suspension of writ of habeas corpus. So what is habeas corpus? Okay, writ of habeas corpus is actually the writ or the law for human rights. Okay, so when human rights are being suspended, then that is by military powers through uh, martial law. Okay, so for example, that in a martial law, for example, you are suspected to become enemy of the state, then your your writ of habeas corpus is being suspended. Okay. A writ directed to the persons detaining another, commanding him to produce the body of the prisoner at the designated time and place, the object of which is the liberation of those who may be imprisoned without sufficient cause. So when there is a suspension of habeas corpus, then you may be imprisoned without trials. Okay, ground for suspension, invasion, rebellion, when public safety requires it. In other words, uh, the suspension of writ of habeas corpus may happen if there is invasion, rebellion, and then public safety requires it. which is also the um, ground for what do you call this one? Martial law. The martial law will occur when there is invasion, okay, just like the ICs, just been here in the Mindanao, we're still in martial law through invasion, okay, rebellion when there are lawless uh, people, and then when public safety requires the effects of suspension of freedom, okay, does not affect the right to bail, applies only to person facing charges of rebellion. The arrested must be charged within 3 days. If not, they must be released. Does not suspend civilian authority. Supersede rather. Does not supersede civilian authority. Now, martial law. Okay, so declaration of martial law, invasion, and rebellion. But the following cannot be done. Suspend the operation of the Constitution. So although martial law, the Constitution still be in order. Supplant the function of the civil courts and legislative assemblies. Violate open courts doctrines. Civilians cannot be tried by military courts if the civil courts are open and functioning. So it means to say that although that there is a martial law, when anyone violates a law, there should be uh, open court doctrines. So he are going to have his trials in a proper court, and then automatically suspend the writ of habeas corpus. Okay, so the suspension of habeas corpus is not automatic. There is a process. Now, constitutional of martial law. So the suspension of the privilege of habeas corpus not more than 60 days unless extended by the Congress. So what happened in the Mindanao? Okay, after 60 days, it was extended. So until today, we are still in martial law in Mindanao. The President to report to Congress within 48 hours and then the authority of the Congress to revoke or extend authority of the Supreme Court to inquire of the factual basis for such actions. So these are the limitations of martial law. Okay, ways to lift proclamations or suspensions by the President himself. So if the President lifts the martial law, then the martial law is being suspended. Revocation by the Congress. Only the Congress can also suspend the proclamation of martial law. Okay, nullification by the Supreme Court, and then operations of the law after 60 days. Okay, but after 60 days, if it is extended by the Congress, then the proclamation of martial law still exists. Pardoning power. Okay, when I say pardon, act of grace which attempts individual from punishment which the law inflicts. Okay, as to effect, plenary or partial. Okay, as the absence of condition, and then conditional pardon or absolute pardon. So these are the pardoning power of the president. Okay, amnesty, a general pardon to rebels for the treason or political offense. It so overlooks and obliviates the offense with which he is charged. Person released by amnesty stand before the law precisely as though he had committed no offense. So that's amnesty. The other forms of executive clemency, commutation, which means reduction or mitigation of penalty, and then reprieve, postponement of sentence or stay of the execution. So the president can postpone the sentence or stay the execution. Parole. Okay, parole is the release from imprisonment but without full restoration of liberty in custody of law, although not in confinement. So the parole would be given to a person who committed a crime, which he is being released to imprisonment, but still there are privileges not restored, okay, to him. And then remission of fines and forfeiture prevents the collection of fines and confiscation of forfeited property cannot affect rights of the third party and money already in the treasury. So these are the other forms. Okay, borrowing power. The president may contract or guarantee foreign laws on behalf of the republic with the concurrence of monetary board subject to such limitations as may be provided by law. The monetary board shall submit to the Congress report on loans within 30 days from the end of every quarter. So the president can borrow money. The powers. No treaty or international agreement shall be valid and effective unless concurred in by at least two-thirds of all the members of the Senate. Okay, the power to ratify is vested in the president, subject to the concurrence of the Senate. Okay. Other foreign affairs powers: power to take treaties, power to appoint ambassadors, public ministers, and consuls, power to receive ambassadors from other public ministries, and the deportation power. So that's what we call as diplomatic power. Budgetary power. Within 30 days from the opening of every regular session, President shall submit to Congress a budget or expenditure and sources of financing, including receipts from existing and proposed revenue measures. President can make budgets, and Congress may not increase the appropriation recommended by the President for the operation of the government as specified in the budget. So that's it. The informing power. The President shall address Congress at the opening of its regular session. He may also appear before it at any other time. So the informing power, this would be the state of the nation or the SONA. Okay. The information may be needed for the basis of legislation, and the President usually discharges the informing power through what is known as a State of the Nation address. Okay. Residual power, that is Marcos versus Maglapus. Okay. The power of the President cannot be said to be limited only to the specific powers enumerated in the Constitution. Executive power is more than the sum of specific powers so enumerated. Residual unstated powers of the President are implicit, implicit in and correlative to the paramount duty residing in that office to safeguard and protect the general welfare. The President has unstated residual power which are necessary for her to comply with her duties. Okay, that is the case between Marcos and Maglapus. Okay, other powers. Okay, the President can call the Congress to a special session. Okay, approve or veto bills. What is approve or veto bills? If the Congress and the Senate created a law, okay, this should be signed by the President. Approval or for confirmation that the law should be enacted. However, the President has also the power to uh, uh, revoke the law or not to execute the law. Okay, deport aliens. Aliens here doesn't mean living outside the earth. Deport aliens means the president has the power to deny the visa or the passport of someone. Okay, so for example, just like what happened last time, that a missionary from Australia is being deported, going back to her point of origin. It's because the president, okay, has the power to deport a foreigner. Consent to deputation of the government personnel by COMELEC and discipline them, and then exercise emergency, okay, at war, law, limited, necessary, and tariff power. Power to classify and reclassify lands. So the president can classify the lands or reclassify the lands. That ends my presentation. Thank you and good day.